Hi, my name is Cecilia Poullain, and welcome to this episode of Brave New Women. All around the world, there are amazing, ordinary women doing extraordinary things. Brave New Women is about giving those women a platform and a voice, and it's about changing the way that women are perceived. And it's a way of inspiring all of us to do the things that we've always wanted to do. Today I'm speaking to three biologists from around the world, Amanda Bates, Sarah Davies and Adriana Jimenez. And I'm speaking to them about an article that they have written with 24 other women biologists who come from the US, Canada, Australia, Finland, UK, Fiji and Panama. And the article is it's called Promoting Inclusive Metrics of Success, an Impact to Dismantle a Discriminatory Reward System in Science. So it's all about how the career paths in science, the way that they're assessed, they work against women. So welcome, all of you. Thank you very much for your time. And perhaps if I could just let you each introduce yourselves. So maybe Amanda, if you'd like to say a couple of words.
Sure. My name's Amanda Bates. I'm a professor at the University of Victoria on beautiful Vancouver Island. And I've worked all over the world in a whole bunch of habitats from Antarctica to the deep sea and met extraordinary people along the way, some of who we're talking to today, which is lovely.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sarah Davies. I'm an assistant professor at Boston University. I'm actually from Canada and did my undergrad at University of Victoria. So Canadian connection there. And our lab works on population genomics of corals in response to climate change. And we also work on some other East Coast critters, but mostly thinking about organismal responses to climate change.
Hi, my name is Adriana Jimenez, and I'm a marine biologist working on the impacts of climate change on coral reef ecology, specifically coral reproduction, and using different techniques of assisted evolution to restore reefs and prepare them for future climate change impacts. And I'm originally from Venezuela.
Great, thanks. My first question for the three of you is, how do you all know each other?
Through Twitter. Well, actually, Amanda gave a talk at our university sometime during COVID, and that's how I got to know her. And so we became friends on Twitter through the academic seminars. And I know Adriana's work, but I've never actually met her before. So yeah, when this a questionable article that's now been retracted was published in a really high impact journal, that essentially suggested that women do better when not mentored by women. So essentially when they're mentored by, high level men. We obviously had a lot of feelings about that and tweeted about it. And then we all kind of got together and decided that we should write something. And it ended up originally was going to be like a response to the article, but then we realized that there was so much more to talk about and think about. So it ended up being the article that you read.
Right. So that's interesting that there was actually an article about women mentors not being good for women. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Well, the science was really bad in that article and it's since been retracted. But essentially there was multiple things wrong with the article, but they associated scientific impact with the number of citations that the mentees were getting. And there's so many biases associated with what journals you get published in, how many citations those journals get. There's so many barriers and so many biases associated with having this kind of single way of quantifying scientific impact. So yeah, there's a bunch of discussion. And then we kind of got to writing and coming up with ideas about how we might change the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think what's special about the article, from my perspective, is that oftentimes we know there's barriers or we know that there's biases, and that creates kind of anger, frustration, some of these emotions that are negative. And I feel like as a group, we moved beyond those feelings of anger and frustration, which is hard to do. It takes a lot of emotional intelligence, and tried to put forward a model that would be productive and useful. And that, I think, was the value of working with this team and moving towards something that's just beyond that. Here's a problem.
And well, can you tell me about what, for someone who doesn't work in academia, how does it work and how does it work against women? And tell me about how citations work, because that means nothing to me.
Okay, I will try to explain it shortly. So basically what we do is our research, we publish it in index journals, which are international journals that are recognized in the community because of the process that for reviewing the article. It goes through a few steps that are recognized as good steps to prove that the science behind the article is correct. So basically, when we finish our work, we write the paper and then we submit it to these journals. And then these journals will send the article to review. So usually it's too blind or the author doesn't know who is reviewing the paper. But most of the cases, the reviewers do see the names of the authors and their affiliations. So that already creates a lot of biases because sometimes there's groups that don't work together or don't want some work to be published before their own work is published. But also, like, there's minorities, for instance, people that where English is not their first language and are not good at writing in English. Many times articles get rejected because of language barriers. So the barriers are not only for women, they're for minorities in general. And minorities, it encompasses like all the people that cannot get access to funds, for instance, or to get access to the system that is established to publish. And after you publish your paper, then other researchers will read it. Nowadays, there are a lot of journals that have free access or open access publications. That means that everybody can just Google it and find it online. But many times, and that is something that is new, the open access. But before, you had to pay in order to access to these papers, and that was the way that you could access to knowledge. So universities usually they pay a fee to get subscribed to these journals and have access to the papers. But for instance, universities in developing countries, they cannot afford to pay these fees, so they cannot access this research. So when you're writing your paper, what you do is that you give evidence of what has been published in the past. And for that, you reference previous papers. And in academia, the way that we have been measuring impact is by the number of citations. So how many times your paper has been named in another paper. So if you are a researcher that have a lot of funding and a lot of access to resources and proficiency in English, you will be able to publish more frequently than someone that doesn't have that capability. And the more citations you get, the higher the chances are that, for instance, for you to get a job in an institution with a good salary, for example.
Mm-hmm. What has been I'd like to get back to in a moment to what are some of the solutions that you propose, but what has been your experience as women in academia?
So I've definitely had mostly positive experiences in academia, which is probably why I'm still here. I think it's a little bit of luck of the draw. I think it's a little bit of, I think it has to do with who you were mentored and how good of a match that was. Because I think a better predictor of success is actually the relationship you have with your mentors, which is what a lot of this paper talks about. And not every mentor is good for every person. But there's definitely people that have more of like an adaptive mentoring style that might be, more supportive of more personalities. But I have experienced negative things in academia, but more so since I became a mother, because I think then you're like for sure a woman because you've used your uterus, you know what I mean? And people tend to have strong feelings about that. But yeah, I think that everyone has a different journey. And I think that the more negative experiences you have, and there's so many examples, that's why I'm probably not the best person to answer this, because I feel like I've had actually like a pretty easy ride here. The more likely you are to not feel supported and welcomed, and you're not able to bring your like authentic self to the table and bring your new perspectives to the table. And yeah, I think that the more barriers you have to start, which can be everything from race to where you were born to like access to resources like economics. So thinking about socioeconomic classes, access to resources like if your parents went to college, that's definitely it's going to make going into academia easier for you. So all of these barriers can just like line up against you to start. And then on top of it, if you have these like negative experiences in academia, then you're less likely to stay or feel welcomed. But for me personally, I've obviously experienced sexism and, inappropriate behavior. But not like some of the women that we wrote the paper with. It was like, I don't know, just awful hearing about some people's experiences and how toxic some of the relationships that they've had were. But I feel pretty lucky, and that's probably why I'm here.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that if finding a good mentor is so important.
I mean, I absolutely think it's like the best predictor of whether or not you succeed.
Which is just complete luck of the draw.
Yeah. And there's actually like no value placed on good mentors either. Which is one of the things that we talk about as like a solution, because I do think it's like the best way we can make impact.
Is by finding.
And I think the truth of it is that we'll never completely remove toxic behaviors from any environment. And I've certainly seen really awful things in my career because I'm probably older. And the challenge is how you recover from that, like also building resilience in the system. And I think Sarah's really insightful that having people around you that help you cope and deal with challenges as they come up with other people is really, really key in predicting success.
And Amanda, what has been your experience? Have you personally had a good mentoring? Have you had difficult experiences?
Well, I mean, I've had very difficult experiences, but at the same time, I've had very positive experiences, and I've had people that have been extraordinary mentors along the way. So, I mean, I guess in looking back, I do see change in the system, but it's slow. I still see literally like physical harassment. I'm still observing these kind of things still happening in our system. There are just a huge number of challenges, but just because you have a challenge, if you have a system that supports you through that and provides ways of creating resilience, then that can even make you stronger. And what I really believe when I look at a lot of people who have faced these challenges and barrier and then are now extraordinary scientists, they have greater empathy, they have greater understanding, they have greater communication skills, they have greater self-reflection and how they affect other people. And so I don't necessarily think these things are necessarily bad, but it is bad when they destroy rather than build. And so I think building a system that can take these aspects and turn them into something that ends up being positive. And I don't even know if positive is the right word, but if you can take it and use it to gain skills in your own career and, capacity to work, then that can be a positive thing. And I think that's the only way to deal with them, because that's the only way to emerge stronger from these experiences that so many of us have faced. And I just want to be clear, like, it's not just women, who are facing barriers and challenges. So many people do. Imagine being blind and trying to be a marine biologist. To my knowledge, there's one. And I have a student right now. She's slowly becoming blind. And so we're trying to think about how can she be blind and a marine biologist, because that's what she wants to do. It's a very hard thing to think about in the system in which we have. So if we start with thinking about how to be inclusive, it's going to spread to being inclusive to a whole bunch of different, people that might be facing barriers that we don't even recognize yet, because there's probably things that we don't even understand about our system, and we're creating barriers, and there's other inherent biases.
Mm-hmm. Adriana, have you got something to add on that?
Yes, I just wanted to mention that we have to keep in mind that we are just one data point into the whole sample. And it could be, as Sarah was saying, that we are the outliers of that cloud of data. So our experience doesn't represent the majority in many of the cases, because I think that we are the lucky ones that have been able to succeed in this system. In my case, the barriers that I have faced have been more related to the fact of where I was born, coming from a developing country, and then trying to publish my first paper. It was really challenging, not having the support of writing in English from the beginning in my career. That did put a lot of barriers, and those barriers translated into me not having access to a scholarship for a PhD. So I was applying for a scholarship for 8 years in many different parts of the world, until I finally understood how the process of applying to scholarship worked in a different system from the one that I was where I learned. Yeah. So once I was outside and started to learn how the system works in academia in developed countries, I was able to escalate in position, but it was only after I got out of the country. And I think a lot of people do face these barriers, and there's really excellent researchers in many places of the world that cannot get access to funding and to improve the way they research and produce more knowledge because of these barriers.
And so what do you propose in the paper? I'll throw that out to all of you, whoever wants to take that question.
I'll just start that we started off thinking about it from like our very first folder was called Burn It to the Ground, which is more of a joke. That's not, it's not.
I wasn't joking.
Yeah. I think we would love to see all levels of academia, reevaluate how we think about value in the system. So right now, like we talked about, it's really this I've been on search committees for faculty positions now, and it's really this like bean counting exercise where they're like, well, this person has, 14 publications, one of which is in a top tier journal, and they have this many citations, and they're clearly an emerging leader, and then it's really like it gets down to like really they're counting publications, a number of publications since graduation. Like it's totally insane. And, so I think lots of people are starting to think this too, like just rethinking the way we value people and their relative contributions to the field of science. So, one of the things we've already touched on that is probably for me the most important is the mentorship component. So thinking about how can we build value into the mentorship itself, because really I think it's these relationships that can help really propel someone's career forward. And then the other thing, thinking about well-being of mentees and mentees of all levels. Like, we tend to think about graduate students because those are the people that we interact with for probably the longest period of time. But yeah, I'll maybe stop talking about one of the other people.
The thing that worries me when you talk about mentors is that in many other industries, people tend to mentor people who are like them, and they tend to be good mentors for people who are like them. So how do you get out of having the mentorship system actually encouraging the same people who to be benefited.
I totally think that's totally right. You need to have someone who has some shared lived experience with you. So for example, a Black marine biologist, female, it's going to be pretty near impossible to find a mentor that has had the same lived experience as you. So I think that these people tend to, maybe gravitate towards a woman, and at least they share some identity. And then I think, we should be encouraging our mentees not to just have a single mentor, but to have many mentors, and to find these mentors in different spaces if they don't exist. And, I think the broad plan, like I hope when I leave academia and retire, I hope that our faculty looks very different than it looks today. And I hope that we see more diversity, not just women, but people of color as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But also some of my most important mentors have been actually nothing like me. So I think it's also important to realize it's the diversity of mentors that you need, and you probably need mentors for different challenges that you might face along the way, or even sometimes a perspective rejig. And I guess as a group of people who've been successful so far in academia, I really feel like we have this burden of responsibility to change the system. And that's kind of what really united us, is how do we change the system? And I think what you're getting at here is that we really do want to create a more diverse portfolio of people who are successful. And hopefully that will also perpetuate diversity. And I am definitely seeing things change. So it's exciting that way.
Mm. And apart from mentorship, what are the other things that need to change? And the when you say about citations, I mean, that is just horrific. But if you're just counting publications, because I can imagine that you have people who are actually just great at publishing, but maybe not, I don't know.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that point that you also need to pay to the journal in order to publish your paper as a researcher. So you have to dedicate some part of your funding to be able to publish in a journal, in the majority of the journals, and the prices are actually really high and prohibited for people without funding.
So how much would it be, for example, to publish in one of the top journals?
It's between $3,000 and $10,000 at the moment, I think, more or less.
Wow. Yes, that's a lot.
Yeah. And I think what's really key is, as we sit on editorial boards, we are thinking about all of these things. So we, for instance, try to diversify our editorial board. We try to not select against language as a barrier in the publication process and explicitly say that. So these practices are really shifting. We also offer, free publication in many cases to upon application. But the challenge is that you have to acknowledge that these biases first exist and then propose real mechanisms to overcome them. And it's slow. So I feel like the whole system is slowly changing, but not fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to add that in the paper, we don't propose a silver bullet solution to the problem. It's more a discussion about the problem that is out there and many potential ways of solving it, and topics that are creating or that have created the problem that need to be addressed. But I think at the moment, the discussion is happening in the scientific community. And this is actually what we need. And we need to encourage that discussion to continue at many different levels, at the leadership position of institutions, at editorial boards, at mentors of students, of undergraduates. It's at the whole community needs to start addressing the problem and think about how to solve it.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we haven't touched on yet as well is the fact that we call, if you don't go into academia, we call that alternative careers, even though 95% of PhD students do not go on and do a faculty job. So really the faculty is the alternative career path when there's this diversity of career paths that are really fun and exciting and cool and, give people and society more generally so much value. And in academia, we definitely talk about that as like, oh, an alternative career. And so I think trying to change the way that we think about that. And I'm trying to incorporate that into like all of my classes. Like I bring in panels, like outside academia panels. I don't call them alternative career panels. And people are doing so much exciting stuff and having so much impact in so many different ways outside of academia. And I think it's like exciting to celebrate that. And as mentors, we need to be kind of thinking about preparing our students for the diverse workforce that it will be in front of them, because, you know, we should expect that like very few of our students will go on and become us. So we need to find them mentors outside of us, like what Amanda was talking about, because I, you know, probably can't do very much to help someone find a career in government, but I know people who work in government that might be able to help them, you know, craft how to get there. So I think just the language we use too is really bad. This like alternative careers, like and it's also kind of like, there's a really negative connotation with it amongst some faculty, that it's like kind of dirty, like, oh, you're leaving academia, even though it's like so many people do.
And to somebody who has never worked in academia, that it just sounds bizarre.
Sorry, I'm just puzzled by this, but I guess what I'm trying to craft is that, you know, this system is set up on its own perception of self-excellence. And if you identify what a scientist looks like or what success looks like, those are associated with biases that we learn from a very early age. And I think that, you know, what we haven't mentioned yet is also starting to shift the culture around which we think about what a scientist is or what is valuable in society from a very early age. And if you still go to a grade 3 classroom and ask what kids want to be, they'll say doctor, vet, nurse. So I also think that, you know, the value around some of these things also are around how we portray scientists as, you know, just as people. And I'm personally horrified because my niece this year wants to be a scientist, and she's wearing a lab coat and goggles. And, you know, so she has this bias, even though I'm her aunt. So I also think that this discussion, and I know this discussion is going on because it's going on in schools, in grade schools, at least in Canada. So I hope that this will also transform these inherent biases of what we value in society more generally.
It's interesting for me coming from Australia, but living in France, because in Australia, it's often lawyers, business, doctors, they're the sort of top professions. But in France, the top professions are what they call engineers. And so all the kids are wanting to do maths, physics, and chemistry, because they're the things that get you the top jobs in France. And so I think it's very different in different jurisdictions. How has the paper been received? Has it been cited?
I think so. I haven't actually looked.
That's what I was going to joke. I'm like, well, it's highly cited. I mean, I can reflect on this from a personal perspective. I've published 100 papers, and this is probably the one that I feel is actually the most impactful. And it actually surprised me how well circulated it was, how viewed it's been, and how many people have contacted me. So there are science funding boards in every country, and I had the equity, diversity and inclusion officer, I don't know what to call them, contact me directly with a question about our policy for that funding. And that happened directly through this paper. So I think that anecdotally, we've just had far more circulation of this paper than I ever would have expected. My challenge is I think people are just reading the title and the abstract. So,
yeah. I've had the same experience as Amanda. I haven't published as many papers as her, but it's definitely it was the most challenging experience, I think, from a writing perspective, you know, wrangling 24 authors with really diverse experiences and opinions, which is like the point, was challenging. And I think it's just like showcases, you know, that it's a big hill to climb to achieve kind of diverse perspectives in the room. But it was also one of the most exciting and fun and enriching. And I learned so much about myself and my own biases through the process. I spent a lot of time self-reflecting, and it was, recognizing a lot of these things about yourself is like kind of uncomfortable. But it was really amazing. And then as far as like, I've had, my chair reached out and wanted to have a personal meeting and discuss what she can do as the chair. It was definitely circulated at all levels at the university. A co-author of ours is meeting with the White House representative.
Wow.
I mean, I think, yeah. So I didn't tell anyone yet. I need to tell everyone. I think she hasn't gone yet. It's kind of related to two papers because we also wrote one about academic mothers before this. So it's kind of like both. But yeah, thinking about it's kind of, and someone from NSF wrote to me, like the National Science Foundation, which is our main funding body, just letting me know that like, it was kind of like on the DL, she was like, oh, hey, just so you know, like your paper's making the rounds. And so that kind of felt really good to know that like, oh, people are reading it. And then Proceedings of the Royal Society B, they came out, that was the COVID moms, but still like, I think people are like thinking about it, like actually implementing things. And I think it's great. NSF just came out with like a postgraduate fellowship for students that missed research experiences due to COVID. And they explicitly target mentorship pairs. So they're really starting to think more about creating these like kind of mentorship teams that kind of build and foster these students to like stay in academia. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to add that not only have we had like all this experience that Amanda and Sarah just described of institutions or departments of our institutions approaching us to ask for our opinion or invite us to the EDI board, for instance. That was my case at Newcastle University. I was invited to join the board after the paper, but we had a lot of emails. From the 24 authors, I've received emails from students saying that they were encouraged to open the conversation with their mentors, for instance, or with their schools after reading the paper or proposing the paper for a paper reading club. And I think in my perspective, that is one of the biggest impacts that the paper has had so far, because usually underrepresented minorities, they don't feel encouraged or empowered to speak up and join the table of discussion. And I think the paper does encourage and gives a tool to open the discussion about the topic. And I think that's really the value of this paper, is that it's reaching many different levels.
And many different levels across the world, I would expect.
Yes. And we started talking about a paper that was written that, had part of the issue was about citations and women and value. And the journal that published that article actually approached me, and I just remember this. And they asked me to write an article with an inclusive team of women on a research topic. So they were realizing that their author teams were very biased. And because of this paper, they realized that I would think about my author team carefully. So I put together a group of 5 women. I have, we're very inclusive from all around the world. And Indigenous and English as a second language. And we spoke 3 languages in our meetings because I didn't need to have the meeting in English. It was a really great experience. And I was pleased that the journal learned from that retraction. And we're thinking about the mechanisms that they could put in place to showcase diverse teams. And what was interesting about that is I think they picked me also because I'd won a research award and had been nominated for a research award so it's all interconnected somehow, but showcasing and highlighting and rewarding does lead to these other opportunities. And I don't know how we can ever get away from that because there's so many people around the world, and this is something I've been puzzling about. How do you be inclusive for all of these people? How do you pick amongst 500 potential amazing people to write a diverse paper with when you can beg for 5? When you beg to go from 3 to 5, it's very challenging.
And even this paper, when we were writing, we were approached by many people. Can I join? And then that's why we created this thing where you could go and support the change kind of. And I just looked just because I was curious. It hasn't been cited at all, but it has been viewed 24,000 times.
Wow. Gosh. Yeah. Yeah. And so you were writing with 24 women from around the world. And so that must have been a pretty diverse bunch. And how difficult was that? And how enriching was it?
When we started, we had the list of the 24 authors, and we still were questioning ourselves if we were diverse enough or not. So I think we will never know how diverse the group is or not. It's really hard to measure because each one of us has a different experience and faces many different barriers. It was really challenging to come, because we all had different experiences and ideas, and to produce one single document at the beginning, it was a little bit hard to understand how we were going to make this work. But I think that what really helped is that Amanda was serving as editor and was putting everything together. I think Amanda, Holly, and Sarah were together doing this as editors. So they were sort of taking the lead on driving which way we were going to write what we were proposing, and assigning tasks sometimes to different people. But we were really, really careful, the whole team, when producing the text, that everybody was on the same page and did agree with every single sentence that was written. And we had really long discussions, with just one definition, for instance, women.
You sound like lawyers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what was different is they were emotive discussions. I think that's what made it, and we were questioning so much because you can never represent everything or everyone. And so our challenge as a team, and I think Sarah was really exceptional at this, is in leading this, is to really try and also push, we weren't relying necessarily on everyone to bring up everything to the table. We were also looking at literature and educating ourselves. We were truly trying to be representative beyond our own experiences as well as incorporate the direct experiences that were quite emotional from our co-authors. And that, I think, was the challenge, or something that was very different than any other manuscript I've ever written.
I think some of the topics, for example, toxic mentorship relationships were one of the challenging conversations, thinking about whether, how to address it. And then we realized we maybe don't have the infrastructure in place to address something like that, but making sure that we had language that was still comfortable with people that had really, really negative experiences. And then also parts about things like race. I can't be the person that writes that sentence. That needs to be written by an author of color. So I think that we definitely leaned heavy on other people with different experiences, and the paper would have definitely been it needed the diverse representation. And I think there was we had authors that were outside academia too, which I think was very valuable, and always kind of checked us, because we kind of we kept falling into the academic language. And then someone would be like, careful here, which is really helpful. And then having authors from, countries like, Fiji or Venezuela, and bringing in that perspective to check us on our first world situation. And I don't know, the whole thing was just really enriching, and I learned so much. And, I changed a lot. I changed the way I think about mentorship too, and how like intentional I am about it, and who I choose as my mentees. And I just feel like I like changed. I mean, I think everyone changed a lot over the last year for like many reasons, but this paper was definitely one of the ways that helped me grow as a person.
And is this group, is there a plan for this group to work together again? Is there another paper in the offing?
There was one conversation about the like 10 ways to, write as a diverse group, but I don't know that anyone, everyone's behind because of COVID. And I don't know that I'm sure lots of people have private plans. Like I definitely changed my mentor compact in my lab. I have been being, like I said, like just being more intentional in the relationships I choose to have. I've been, being more engaged on the service side of what I do in my department. I pretty much am only doing service stuff that's helping to diversify the department. So I'm being more intentional about like the ways in which I choose to spend my time. But I personally don't have any follow-ups planned, mostly because I think my students need my mentorship.
But I think this also was inspired. Like we were inspired to write this paper. And that came from a very authentic and a very driven place, I think, for all of us. And so I would suspect that if we were to do something again, we would also need that kernel of inspiration. And that certainly hasn't come to me yet to do some other writing, but I hope it does.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, just congratulations to all of you for having written it. And I think that getting 24 people together to write a single paper and to agree on it, I mean, that is a huge challenge. And then to have it so well received and so well published, I think that is fantastic. So, I mean, I'm encouraged. I don't work in science, and I'm encouraged that there are the same conversations happening in all sorts of different areas in different professions all around the world. And I think that it's only by having these conversations that we will actually change things. So thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Can I just add one thing? Because you just made me think about it. My girlfriend, one of them is an architect, and one of them is like in business. And they both circulated their paper to their admin too. Because when they read it, they were like, so this isn't really just science. It's just like everything. It's just like universal. You've come at it from a science perspective, but like a lot of the things that we suggest, the citations and stuff maybe isn't appropriate, but the way to think about building a more inclusive community, a lot of the strategies we talk about are like across the world, not just like science.
How can people get hold of the paper?
It's open access. So
you just type it in Google or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
I'll put the title in the show notes. So if people want to find it, then they can. So has anyone else got anything that they'd like to add just to finish off?
I just wanted to add one point that the diversity it's not only like we would like teams to be more diverse, but it has been really well studied and shown that diverse teams come with better solutions to problems. And we're facing nowadays like really difficult problems in the world, the pandemic, for instance, or climate change. Diverse teams will make a much better job getting to a solution than biased teams. So I think our whole society will benefit of a change in the culture that how we work together. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Amanda, have you got a final word?
I think my final word is, if you air this podcast, I would love to see the comments that come up, because what I will find fascinating is that all of our perspectives, there will probably be a lot of discussion around some of what we've said as well. And I think of these discussions as, I don't know how you might want to describe them, but it will generate other discussions, and how we've picked to answer these questions and even the language we've used, I'm sure will evoke discussion.
Absolutely. Well, thank you to all three of you. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Cecilia.
Thanks.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Brave New Women. certain podcast sites such as Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or Podchaser let you leave a rating and a review. The more ratings and reviews we get, the more people will listen and the more these women's stories will be shared. So I'd really appreciate it if you could. Thanks for listening.